we are going to talk a little bit about Skycrafter, what Skycrafters is doing, and also a particular piece of Skycrafters that is the open source part. And Shabi is going to talk way more about that. So let me define Skycrafters first, if I had to define Skycrafters. Skycrafters, and I'll just read this right here, is a community for those who want to grow their skills, build their career, and innovate by learning and sharing best practices for secure and scalable cloud operations. All right. So what exactly does that mean, and how does that translate to something tangible? So
I'm sorry, Raf.
There you go. It's working now. So let me start with the why. By the way, if you look at my LinkedIn, if you look at Shabi's LinkedIn, you're going to see that we're actually working for Trend Micro. Okay, Trend Micro is a cybersecurity giant that has been around for over almost 35 years now, out of Japan, and this year we decided we are really big in giving back to the community in a lot of different ways. And Skycrafters is a way to give back to the community. It's something that Trend Micro is sponsoring, but it's not directly involved. So they are not making sure that we're talking about Trend Micro. They're not making sure that there are not other vendors talks going on there. It's a really vendor agnostic community that Trend Micro is sponsoring, just so us cloud builders, cloud practitioners can work together, be part of a community of like-minded people, right? And the idea here is that anyone, it doesn't matter where they are in their cloud learning journey, anyone can improve their skills, sharpen their knowledge, creativity, influence together, right? So let me talk a little bit more about the how. And I guess I lost, oh, it's back. It's a community that is open to anyone, right? So again, you don't need to work as Trend Micro, don't need to be a Trend Micro customer. You might even be a different player in the cybersecurity market. That's totally fine. It's open, it's truly open for everyone and anyone, right? And it's super cool because it's community driven. So if you take a look at our website, you're going to see our logo, of course. And our logo was actually picked by the community themselves, right? So we community members themselves. We're not even trying to pick the logo. It's actually truly community driven. Trend Micro is just sponsoring, right? And it's all about fixing challenges, working on challenges together, right? It's truly about that. And it's really about going beyond the best practices, right? So if you Google what's the best way to run a container on AWS, you're going to find a lot of articles on that, right? If you have a particular problem that is happening and you copy and paste your issue on Google, you're going to probably end up in Stack Overflow with a step-by-step how to fix your problem, right? That's not what this community is about. This community is about sharing your losses and wins. It's all about discussing with your peers and trying to find something that works for you, not the best practices, because this is real world, right? Best practices are beautiful, but they are beautiful on paper. We know that it's really tough to put them in practice. Otherwise, every product or service or whatever would come pre-configured with best practices all the time, right? And I really like to think as a place and a way to, and I mentioned before, improve your skills, but not just your cloud skills, even your writing skills, your social skills, why not, right? At least I'm using the community a lot that way. We have a team of people that can help you write your own articles, right? So let's say that you're really knowledgeable in whatever, right? Since I said containers, let's say containers. And you really want to write an article about it to share your knowledge, but you always felt like, I don't know, I don't write really well. As myself here, my English is not my first language. Maybe that's the case for you as well. So you don't feel super comfortable about writing in English. That's totally fine. We actually have a dedicated team of people to help you get your content out of your mind and in written words in our website, right? We really want to help you go to the next level. It doesn't matter if it's learning a new skill in cloud or learning how to write an article. We want to make sure that you're improving your skills. And of course, who doesn't love swags, right? We also have really cool swags. Actually, they're just coming, so no one have swags yet. But for those that join the community and get to level 1, we have 4 different levels there. And we can go over more details about that in another moment. But we are promising that for those first 50, if I'm not mistaken, that get to level 1, we're going to get really cool swags with Skycrafters logo. And again, it's a really cool logo because the community picked the logo. Okay. And so here it's an example of another person that doesn't have English as first language that really want to talk about this new technology that he learned in Azure. It's called BSPIS, if I'm not mistaken. It's infrastructure as code, new infrastructure as code approach to Azure. And our team helped him come up with his first article, right? So he had this knowledge inside his head, and working with our team, he was able to write his first article. And it was one of the most commented articles that we had in the community so far. So it's pretty cool to see someone that was afraid about writing and having people discussing why is this good, why not Terraform, and then generating a really good thread that is not what is the best one, what is the worst, but this works for me because maybe that's going to work for you because of something else, right? So that's pretty cool. And if you don't want to write a full article, that's totally fine as well. We have members that just want to discuss a topic and they write a really short topic and start the discussion, such as Brittany here that started discussing about vendor lock-in in the cloud. And that was one of the most common topics so far as well. And people are really, really opinionated about this topic because no one wants to face lock-in, but at the same time, no one wants to invest the money to not get into a lock-in situation, right? So it was a really good article to see happening over time. Again, really recommend going over that one as well to see what the members think. And it's really easy to get inside of this community. You just need to register, and you can even read without registering if you want to take a look first. I'm not saying that you need to register just to look to see if you want to be part of that or not, but if you become a member, it would be really cool if you could find the introduce yourself topic, introduce yourself there. So people know what kind of expertise you have, what you're trying to get out of the community, and maybe it's a cool random fact about you or something that you like to do in your leisure time, right? And if you can come back once for 5 minutes every other day, I'm sure that you're going to find something new to discuss with your peers. If you don't, maybe you want to share something new that you just learned, news that you just heard about AWS or Azure. It's a really easy place to get in and discuss whatever, of course, since as long as cloud related, wherever comes up to your mind. If you want to find people that are really open-minded, that's the right place, right? And we have 3 pillars in this community. So if you go to skycrafters.io, you're going to see our blog-like page. It's where the main content lives. But whenever you finish reading your content and you want to discuss about it, if you click to discuss, you're going to be taken to the second pillar, the conversation pillar. For those that are familiar with Discourse, not Discord, but Discourse, it's a forum platform that we're using, open source platform. And that's, to me, that's the really cool part of the community, where people get together and discuss either a content that was published in our blog. And by the way, all content published there as of right now was created by someone from the community, right? So the community is writing these highlighted articles with the help with the team that I mentioned before, right? But even that, or whatever you want to talk about, that's the conversation pillar. And then we have the open source pillar, the code pillar, but I won't talk about it. I'll leave my friend Shadi to talk more about it.
Thank you, Raf. Yeah, so as Raf was saying, there is the content pillar, which is, pretty static conversation that is very dynamic. But what is a tech community without any sort of code? Code being, the essential piece of any sort of technology today. And the idea here is to be able to integrate the code with the concept of a community. And obviously, the easy solution for this is open source. Skycrafters is not necessarily a open source community from the get-go, but we have a open source mindset and a strong affinity with open source. And it comes in different flavors. The first flavor, and that's the flavor that I'm going to talk about today, is as Skycrafters, we are cloud practitioners. I've been in the cloud for more than 10 years. I was the founder of Cloud Conformity. That was a by trend. That was a CSPM. Is still a CSPM because it's still operational, but essentially cloud is my thing, and I'm a developer at heart. So I like to mingle with the code and the cloud to come up with nifty solutions that are actually useful for any DevOps or cloud practitioner. And those kind of ideas come from Skycrafters, but we are also open to ideas that stem out of our community. For instance, we're going to have some members thinking about, hey, like I've got a tool that I'm thinking about, or I have this gap in my CI/CD pipeline, or I'm struggling with some sort of visibility, and I'm thinking of this tool that do not exist yet. And maybe we'll be able to help this person or this group of people to come up with a technical solution to alleviate this problem. It could also be, as Skycrafters, looking at what's happening outside of Skycrafters. I'm sure you guys know about some open source projects out there that are kind of dealt with by one or two contributors that you are actually using every day, but you feel like this open source project should have more traction, should have more contributors. We would be more than happy to help this kind of initiative and help those kind of essential growing open source projects, or not necessarily growing, but kind of hidden open source project, and put them in a growth phase. And also we have plans around organizing hackathons, maybe once a year or twice a year. And why not have some of our projects included or featured into the CNC Foundation as incubator phase or graduation phase. So that's pretty much what we are thinking of in terms of open source. But today I want to talk about this cloud responder and hopefully give you a working demo. It's still in a beta phase, so just like every live demo, things can happen, and it should work, but we'll see. But what it is, it's an open source tool that simplifies the detection and response of significant events. What does that mean? It means that whenever a significant event comes up, and I'm going to take the very classical example of Yura or AWS. One of the best practices is that you should not use your root account. You should create a user instead, and essentially use the root account to create this AWS account, but you should never use this user because this user has access to all the resources, has the extreme amount of privileges, and this is not a good thing to do. You want to know whenever somebody is using this root login. And for instance, a use case here could be, as soon as somebody logs in, you want to detect that event, and you want to do something about it by sending a Slack message, sending an email, sending a PagerDuty event, maybe creating a Jira ticket, or whatever you can think of as a response to this event. The cloud responder should be able to do that. The idea that there is a minimum code required, and when I say minimum, in my mind, that should be like no code. The only piece of code that you should be dealing with is configuration files via YML files, essentially just configuring the tool to your liking. Should be very easy to use as a user, but also easy to contribute to. That means as a developer that is not necessarily used to open source contributions, anyone should be very comfortable contributing to this tool, because the getting started guide is going to be easy. The how to contribute is going to be easy, but also because the tool is very modular, and any small feature can be brought into the tool without breaking anything. And of course, the cloud responder should be cloud agnostic. I was taking the example of AWS. It's simply because I know AWS best, but it could be Azure, GCP related. And also, it could be event agnostic. That means an event doesn't necessarily need to come from a public cloud provider. It could come from Atlassian. Let's imagine that in your Atlassian suite, somebody creates a user, and this user has been escalated to admin privileges. You want to know about this. It's not necessarily something bad, but you maybe want to be notified about this. The cloud responder should be able to do this. So as you can see, it's not necessarily a security tool. Obviously, there are a lot of security use cases that can come out of it, but it could be also a purely DevOps, cloud practitioner sort of tool that can be handy. The stage of development, as I was saying, is a private beta. It's using serverless technologies, or a bunch of Lambda functions on AWS. The idea is to move that into a container solution, so this can be deployed to any cloud infrastructure. There is a roadmap that I have in mind that is pretty extensive, is growing every day, but of course, because we don't have as many contributors, the roadmap grows and the code doesn't grow as fast, obviously. And that's why we're looking for contributors and beta testers. You can go ahead.
Sorry about interrupting you, but so I just thought about this here. If we get at least 10 people that are here tonight listening to this presentation to go to this topic and say, hey, I want to help, even if it's testing their code, we are going to donate $100 to the charity that Jim mentioned earlier today.
I love this idea. Thank you, Raf. That's awesome.
I'm going to donate out of my own pocket, by the way.
Wow, incredible. Well, if you do so, I'll do it as well. So
there you go.
There you go. We have 200 here. So I'll do a quick demo, and this is when things are breaking. So bear with me. I'll stop sharing and I'll start sharing the entire screen, and let's see what happens. And by the way, I'm going to pause here and see if there are any questions.
Feel free to take yourself off of mute if you have a question, or you can also type into the chat. Okay, I don't see anything in the chat yet.
All right, so as I was saying, it should be very simple to use this tool. This tool is developed using Node.js. And really, at the end of the day, there is just one file that should be configured. And the file describes flows. A flow is a combination of a rule that will be triggered when a particular event happens. And then the actions will be, whatever action you want to trigger when this specific event happens. So for instance, here, the first one is a non-compliant user has been created. Let's imagine that this rule is essentially saying that every user on AWS IAM has to be created under this convention, first name underscore last name. Easy. If any user is created that is not following this convention, I want to trigger this flow. So here, the flow is going to be a sequential flow that is going to send a Slack message saying, hey, this username has been created. And at the same time, it's going to send an email. This email will essentially repeat the same message, but maybe to different recipients. And then we're going to wait. We're going to wait for somebody to take action, whether, ask the creator of this user to remove it and, rename it or something like this. But we want to give a bit of leniency. And here, just for the sake of the example, we're going to wait 10 seconds. 10 seconds later, we're going to check whether or not this user is still present in this infrastructure. And if this user is still present, we're going to send a Slack message saying, hey, I'm going to remove this non-compliant user. I'm actually going to remove it from the infrastructure and then send a Slack message that it's all fine. This user has been deleted. But all the steps we're taking not only to tell the team that something bad happened, but then there is an automation that comes on top of it that says, if no human is taking action, I'm going to take action and I'm going to remediate this. This is just one example. Another example could be somebody has logged in from a suspicious IP address. In that case, there is no way back. There is no such a thing as unlogin. We could imagine a disconnect or log off scenario. But here we just want to send a Slack message and an email saying, something happened. You may want to take a look at it. Let's imagine this is like Sunday morning, 2 a.m. You receive this kind of message, or even worse, the root user has logged in at 2 a.m. Sunday morning. This is not something you want to take lightly, and you really want to take a look at it. So the tool should be able to do that. Now I'm going to try that and see what happens. So I have my Slack here open, and I'm going to log out from my AWS account. And I'm going to log back in. So here I'm logging in with the root user, which is, as you know, not something that anyone should be doing, but I'm doing it anyways. And, it's not that bad because I'm using MFA. So, can only be blamed at 50%. So I'm logging in here and, this is something bad. So let's see what's happening on this Slack channel. So it usually takes a few seconds for the event to trigger, but as you can see here, I've got a message that says root user has logged in, a suspicious activity has been detected because I'm logging in outside of working hours. And on top of that, I'm actually logging in from a untrusted IP address. I've configured my system to whitelist the addresses that come from my VPN. And that time around, I didn't log in by the VPN. So this is something to take into account. Now, another use case, I'm going to create user that is not compliant. So here, the username is non-compliant user with no underscore in between. Let's see what happens. So that's it. The user has been created. And here, I should be receiving this message. And now I'm going to wait a little bit. At the same time, I should have received a few notifications here on my email. But 10 seconds later, I've actually removed the non-compliant user and the user has been removed. So that's pretty much it. it is a very lightweight framework that is designed to be not so complicated, but extremely flexible. And the whole idea is that anyone can create those very simple rules. Anyone can create those very simple actions. And maybe you have a use case that comes to mind for you that you would like to see happen. We will be more than happy to hear about this kind of feedback. For instance, I can have an idea around, somebody creates a super large instance on a dev environment. You definitely don't want this happening because there is no reason for any developer to have this large instance. You may not want to delete it right away, but maybe you want to tag it with a specific tag. And every week or every day, you want to review all the resources that have been tagged in a particular way. And maybe you want to take action. So I think that is a good way here to expand this project. But for now, I'm going to stop and I'm going to ask you guys a few questions. And the first question would be, is there any use cases that you would see that can be applied to this project, to this open source project? Is there anything that you guys can think of in terms of next feature to implement or a flow to implement or something that you're doing every day that can be automated thanks to this tool?
And again, you can take yourself off mute. Oh, there we go. Who's that?
No, that was Raf. I have one if nobody else has.
I was gonna say, yeah, feel free though to take yourself off of mute or to type your response or comment into the chat.
Yeah, I can think it's challenging to be on top of every pipeline that you have in code pipeline. So it would be interesting to have something that works at a global level, looking at the pipelines, and if there is a failure there, to notify the right team, right? So code pipeline fails, send me a Slack message or something like that.
Yeah,
or maybe something around ports that are open that should not be open.
Yeah. Great call, Ben. This is a very, very typical use case where somebody creates a security group that is open to the world. And maybe you don't want to remove the security group. Maybe you want to tag it. Maybe you want to wait a day and then remove it if no one is taking action. Yeah, that's definitely a good one.
Yeah, I like how flexible it is because you can decide if you want to right away remove it, if you want to tag it, if you want to wait for a day and then delete it. That's very cool.
It reminds me of a system we looked at recently. It's called PackBot, Policy as Code by I think it was T-Mobile, maybe.
Yeah, T-Mobile.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. It's very similar. I'm familiar with PackBot. And one of the caveats of the Cloud Responder here is that it is only responding to events that are happening. If the Cloud Responding is missing this event for some reason, because CloudTrail has been disabled or whatever scenario, it will not be proactively looking for things. It's only here as a reactive capacity, whereas PackBots have this proactive capacity and will essentially scan the environment every now and then to find out exactly those kind of security groups that are open to the world.
Yeah, and something else is that it's a vendor agnostic framework. So we're just touching AWS examples here, but if you're using VMware on premises and you have a way to send the events to Cloud Responder, you can really easily create automations to respond to VMware events if you want to. So it's not restricted to certain cloud vendors.
So here, another question is, Ben, you answered, like there is at least one answer that we can get out of this question is PackBot, this open source project that is similar, not identical. we are super keen to hear about, hey, is there any other open source project out there that would essentially prevent us to reinventing the wheel? And if we can contribute to something that exists out there, we'll probably be better off at the end of the day for the entire community. So we'll be very open to do that. There is one that I can think of, which is not necessarily open source, but could be AWS config that does something similar, where like it's looking at changes happening in your infrastructure and can do compliance checks, things like this. But I think it sits more into the detection side of things as opposed to the responsive side of things, where it's going to be there to notify SNS, but then it's going to be up to you to define what do you do with this notification. Do you trigger a series of events? Do you send an email? Do you send that to a notification system?
Yeah, I think that's the main difference, because you need to write your own Lambda code to react to the event, while this framework allows you to just simply say wait or send a Slack message or something like that. It really simplifies the response action.
Yeah. Another question is, I was mentioning our open source initiative. Do you folks have a open source tool in mind that you're using quite frequently that has little contributors or maintainers that you think should deserve more attention? Is there anything you can think of that would be like this?
So I'll answer that one as well. I cannot think of a specific one, but I think that overall open source needs a little bit more of love, in the sense of being financed, right? Because we all love open source. We are all using open source all the time, but we fail to recognize that people are working for free in most of these open source projects, right? And not all of them are as big as Kubernetes that have support from Google, Microsoft, or Apple, or whatever, right? So I think that overall we should be paying more attention to open source as a whole, and more than that, to open source developers. But I would love to hear specifics.
Yeah, or maybe you could create a coin or a token that people could invest in to get behind the project.
That's a really great idea right here.
Yeah, I mean, create a coin and you would earn coins as your PR gets approved, gets merged into the main branch or something like this, or as you create an issue, or as you participate into an open source community. I wouldn't be surprised if something like this happens in the coming years at all.
Hey, it could become a reality inside of Skycrafters. We could start that with you, Ben. I like that.
I'd invest in that.
I would as well.
We could probably get Elon Musk in on that too.
That'd be awesome. Like I've seen this problem. Like personally, I created a driver for AWS DynamoDB because I released it open source, but then it's super hard to find contributors to your project, even get the project the visibility that it deserves. When you're this kind of single developer, not necessarily plugged into any community, how do you make your open source software known to a wide audience? Like, what are the ways to do that? I actually don't know. I actually don't know how to do this, how to get traction. And I think that's probably one of the harder things to do initially, how to get your project known to the world.
Do you think that's something that we can help with, Shabby?
I think that's
Skycrafters.
Absolutely. And this is why I'm asking this question, because I'm sure there are tons of projects out there that should have attention, and this is one of our missions. Make sure that those kind of open source projects that are maintained by one person, what if this one person gets hit by a bus and there's no maintainer and the code is too complicated, but there are gazillions of users using this open source tool or project, and there is a security flaw? What happens then?
Yeah, not that long ago, there was this case of a node package that was removed from NPM because its own one creator and maintainer decided he wouldn't support that anymore. And it broke a big chunk of the internet. That was 4 or 5 years ago. I'll try to find the article here and share with the team. And I don't remember exactly why he decided to do it, but I would assume that it would be a fair reason not being recognized as a project that was being helpful to that many people.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to talk to somebody like Kosuke Kawaguchi, who created Jenkins, because there was no corporate sponsor behind Jenkins in the early days. Now CloudBeast is behind it, but they didn't get behind it until long after it was the de facto automation system, right, for builds and CI. So it'd be interesting to talk to him about kind of how that grew, because I think it was pretty viral and organic, right? He didn't put any money into pushing it. And then like you were saying too, like what came first? Did you get a bunch of other contributors on board and then it started to gain traction, or did it become wildly popular and Kosuke was still pretty much the only guy contributing? I don't know the answer to that, but not just Jenkins, but other open source, popular systems out there that maybe started without any kind of a corporate sponsor. And like you said, that started as a solo act.
Yeah. So let's imagine that there is an open source project out there that has traction, that passes all the security checkboxes and has a healthy amount of contributors. Then the next question that I'm thinking is, what does it take for a corporation or for a software developer or a company that is using open source to actually decide to use this open source project? Would the licensing influence the decision taking? I would rather say decision making, but is there a license dimension to the adoption of an open source? Would the licensing model prevent the open source project to take off? Is there such a thing?
Come on, don't want to be the first one again.
Yeah, well, let me just jump in and say, because I've been on the other end of that, right, on the licensing side of things, and I think it's always a consideration for sure, right? Is this free to all, or is there a corporate sponsor where if now I want to put this into the enterprise, there's a licensing model for support and upgrades, or for a hardened enterprise, more scalable version of the open source project. Yeah, and that's always going to be a consideration, right? Because it's there's a line where there's cost and value, and if you're not getting the value for the cost, then you're not going to get it approved. Maybe
isn't
back
that
in
a
like
common
1999
pattern? I thought that was somewhat of a common pattern. I mean, if you look at CentOS and what's taking place with Red Hat, and then you look at Wildfly and how that is, JBoss. You can use Wildfly and to your heart's content. However, there isn't like a predictable upgrade support path, and you may have customers or clients that push you. I mean, we've had this happen where we use a lot of open source, and we've had customers say, well, we want you to be on something that has support and that has predictable upgrade, roadmaps and blah, blah, blah. And we're like, and it's very hard to explain to them that the open source, product many times is just as good or superior. However, sometimes it's actually, Red Hat or whoever, Oracle might be talking to the customers saying, you're way better off if you get this, fully supported version of which is virtually the same thing. I mean, Wildfly and JBoss are extremely, somewhat under the covers, same thing.
That's a great point. Many open source projects survive because the author or the main maintainer or the team of maintainers are offering a commercial license that either offers something extra or usually just supporting. If you're a customer and you want to make sure of that open source code and you want to make sure that if you find a bug, they're going to be dealt with first or instead of others, you have a monthly fee that you pay for the maintainers. That's super usual. And something else that I wanted to mention was the Elastic license changing confusion that happened probably like a couple months ago, where they felt attacked by how AWS was using their name to provide a service that wasn't approved by them. So you go to AWS and then you have the Elasticsearch service, and they never approved the use of their name, and they decided to change the license. And so pretty much they changed the game rules during the game. So and the community was really, especially those that contributed their time to write code to this open source project, got really opinionated about this change because they contributed code to one license, and then overnight they saw the license completely change, right? So that was
that's a
really
good point.
one to follow. Yeah,
because AWS does offer the Elasticsearch, service.
Yeah. Azure and Google also do, but they actually came up with a partnership with Elastic, and that's why they use the Elastic name. At least I'm just speaking what I read here, right? I might be completely wrong. They actually are dealing with a lawsuit because of this. But what I read was that, and what Elastic is saying is that they never agreed to lend their name for the service. If they wanted to run the open source code as a service, they should have come up with a different name. But yeah, it's a kind of a big crisis in the Elastic community.
Is that why I thought I read that they recently changed their name to OpenSearch.
Yeah, they made a fork of the Elastic code. So they are contributing now to OpenSearch instead of Elastic's code. Now, I'm not sure if they also changed the name of the service when they did that. I'm really not sure.
Wow, does that mean that Elasticsearch will become stale, or are they?
So it is still open source, but they created their own license, and pretty much it says you can use it whatever way you want, but you cannot make money out of it. And then there's a big discussion of, hey, but my dashboard that I built for my customers, is using Elasticsearch? Is that making money out of Elasticsearch? Or is that just offering Elasticsearch as a service, a way to make money out of it? So it's something so new and so different that there's still a big discussion going on what the heck does it mean, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm sure it can get complicated.
Oh yeah, when you involve legal, it can really quickly. It's a fascinating discussion, though. I would love to keep that discussion going another time.
You touched on I think you touched on another point earlier too, that even though you might be paying for an enterprise version or supported version of an open source project, it may not be as good as the current open source version. For instance, if you were to use a managed Kubernetes service, chances are they're not going to be on the latest version of Kubernetes. You know, not the day that it comes out, maybe not even in the first couple of months when it comes out. So you're always going to be behind a little bit.
Yeah, that's a valid point as well.
Which may be okay, right? If you're weighing things and saying, well, you know, it's more important to have a supported version than to have the latest to the day that it comes out, or maybe that is more important to you to have the latest the day it comes out. So that's just something that you do need to consider when you're looking at those things.
Yeah, absolutely.
The last question for us, and it's like a very wide question. What is going to be the future of open source in the cloud? You know, we talked about this Elasticsearch episode with AWS. Are we going to face similar things, or will we see that at some point the cloud and open source will go hand in hand, and maybe different licensing models will come up and we'll have a better ecosystem? Will we have more cloud providers contributing to the open source? You know, there's always this kind of one-way road where open source contributors are contributing to a project, and this project gets used for commercial things, but there is not necessarily a way back where those commercial entities are necessarily always contributing back. Do we think this is going to change, or maybe we're going to go back and open source will be something of the past and the cloud will become something that is about proprietary software that is, you know, obscure and hard to crack and hard to use? What is it going to be?
I mean, as you can tell, I've been studying crypto in my spare time. So I would, you know, I don't know, the decentralized model seems to be something so powerful with, you know, companies that are coming about creating something like YouTube that's totally decentralized, and there's no owner, but it's based on, you know, contributions to that product, and then those investors from I mean, and I'm a complete novice in this area, but you know, they generate a token that brings value to a community and to a service. So investors invest into that token that then supports, you know, some service of whatnot. And I forgot the site, but there's like a decentralized YouTube that people can upload videos and everything that, you know, doesn't have like a central head. It's more of a, you know, the starfish as opposed to the spider. So it can live, you know, forever, kind of.
Yeah, I think the name is the Internet Computer. I think that's the name of the coin, and they have a bunch of nodes, and anyone can create a node, but essentially is, to your point, a way to distribute computing power. And I think the first application is, you know, this equivalent to YouTube, but we can imagine that a database system or a queue system, a notification system could be developed out of it and create this this cloud that is everywhere and nowhere at the same time. I've been looking at crypto as well for a while. Back in the days, there was this storage coin. The idea was that you could allocate a part of your hard drive to this network. Filecoin is working exactly the same way. And essentially you earning coins as you sharing this, storage place on your hard drive. And, the more storage you have, the more coins you earn. And that's a very interesting model to follow.
Right, because you incentivize those that can, bring value to the pattern or framework, all those thousands, millions of people with a little bit of extra hard disk space, but then you create something that, you can store, incredible amounts of storage in a secure manner. Because it's distributed and it's not like it's at one node. It's like backed up and redundant and as good as, RAID systems and things like that.
Yeah, and I think it has the potential of changing the edge computing, because all of a sudden the file that you are requesting may be sitting on your neighbor's laptop, or somebody that is very close to you. So edge computing takes a whole different dimension when you're talking about peers delivering data to you.
What I got out of it was that the next NADOG meeting is going to be about cryptos and tokens led by Ben and Shabi. That's a fascinating
get an
topic.
audience for that. Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, so my take on this question is that cloud is ran on top of open source, right? What is now running on Linux nowadays, at least that. And it's pretty cool to see whenever, let's say, AWS came up with, oh my God, what's the name? It's not Kata containers, it's the other one that they use to run Lambda functions. Their micro VM that is almost like a container, super fast and small. I forgot the name. But nevertheless, to see AWS contribute the code they came up with to be able to run Lambda functions is super nice.
Oh yeah, that was Firecracker.
Yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah.
Right. So super cool to see that kind of thing happening. To see the cloud providers contributing back to the community with their own code. But I'm sure there's a lot of proprietary pieces that are not available to the community, right? Because that they need to have a differentiator between the other players, among the other players. So I'm curious to see what the future reserves to us in terms of open source in the cloud, because I know there's a lot of potential. But at the same time, I also know that these different players are going to be closer and closer in terms of capabilities and features and price and locations that they need to find a way to differentiate themselves. I hope code is not it, but I think it might be.
I always have problems getting people on open source projects to do something that I want rather than what they were thinking they just do themselves anyway. And they tend not to work to any standards. I'm kind of seeing the open source community missing a standards body that says, well, this is how that kind of project should talk to this other kind of project. And people just go off, do things in their own corner until it runs out of steam.
So true, so true. I'm not a huge user of containers, but I really like the container community because they came up with the open container initiative where they have their standard for images, they have their standards for runtime, and all the players nowadays, of course, took a while, but all the major players if they want to play in the playground, they need to follow the standards, right? So it's nice to see that happening on that front. Maybe others are going to follow, but at the same time, if you have a breakthrough technology that for some reason cannot follow the standards, then you're missing an opportunity because nobody's going to look at your products, your code, your open source code. Standards are really interesting. So there's a cartoon about that, a comic that says, oh my God, all these different standards, right? We need to find a way to finish that. And then now there's yet another standard. So it's standards, it's important, but it's tough. It's really tough.